Hello, everyone. My name is Gene Kim, and I am here with my distinguished panelists to talk about the DevOps Enterprise Summit and specific advice from the program committee on how to get your proposal accepted for the conference. So in the next 40 minutes, what we have in store is we're going to go through a brief background on the DevOps Enterprise Summit and the programming committee. I'm going to have each one of our panelists introduce themselves. Talk about the importance of the call for presentations, and then give some specific advice to submitters, both going through the top reasons for rejections, as well as open-ended discussion on advice to people submitting for the conference. So on this slide, I'm showing the distinguished programming committee members who I'm so grateful for all their help for the DevOps Enterprise Summit. And so how about we go do a quick round of introductions. I'm just going to go from my top to bottom. Jeff, why don't you start? And if everyone can just talk about, introduce yourself in terms of your role and what makes your investment of time in DevOps Enterprise worthwhile. Jeff?
Yeah.
Now go to Dominic and John.
Yep, I'm Jeff Gallimore. I'm the CTIO and co-founder of Accela, a company based out of Washington, D.C. And the reason that I invest time in the DevOps Enterprise Summit is really because of the, A, because of the community, and B, because of what I learned from that community. It's the most authentic, genuine, sharing, giving community professionally, maybe even personally, that I've ever been a part of. And there's something very compelling about that. And I find every single time that I always get more than I end up giving. I cannot outgive the community. So, so that's why.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff, and for all your help over the many years. Dominica.
Hi, so Dominica DeGrandis. I'm Principal Flow Advisor at Tops. And so what that means is I primarily help organizations design experiments to improve their flow. And the reason that's such a great tie-in for me at the DOES conference is because the bulk of the talks at DOES are related around experience reports. And so we're looking at essentially experiments that by their very nature, in order to be an experiment, we're interested in the data and in the metrics to show how much we've improved. And so that's really what I look forward to, is hearing all the experience reports and how people made those happen and how they got there and what the results were.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dominica, and thank you for all your help over the many, many years. John.
Hi, John Smart. I lead business agility at Deloitte. I've been on the programming committee for about 4 years, spoken at the DevOps Enterprise Summit, along with my colleagues here. For me, what makes the DevOps Enterprise Summit special is I like the fact that it's practitioners, it's the horses, not the unicorns, it's the big dysfunctional, large, old companies and people who are actually doing the job talking. I like the fact that there's vulnerability, that people have the same problems. It's like group therapy when you come together. And it's vendor neutral, which I like as well.
Brilliant. And thank you for all your help over the years. And I'm so excited about your book coming out that we're going to get a peek at later this year. All right. So in terms of program committee, we challenge ourselves to make each event better than the last. And I think we're on 2.5 years running where I think we've outprogrammed the last one. And we are so heavily reliant on experience reports, as Dominica had mentioned. So here are the tracks that the structure of the DevOps Enterprise Summit. So as Dominica mentioned, the majority of the talks are experience reports. So we have, we kind of internally categorize them as repeat experience reports. So these are people who have presented before, and then they are presenting again on the continuation of the journey, and new experience reports, so people presenting for the first time. But there's a specific subset of those that are around spanning the business and technology divide. So these are the experience reports where we have technology leaders co-presenting with their business leader counterpart. and not just proximate to, but ideally that business leader talking about how grateful they are and how they couldn't do what they need to do without all of the help they get from their technology leader partner. We have another track called Overcoming Older Ways of Working. I credit John Smart for that brilliant, pithy name. And this is where we're looking for talks of how technology transformations can coexist with more conservative, older parts of the organization, such as information security, compliance, project management, even external auditors, and so forth. We have another track focused on next generation operations and infrastructure. A new track for this year is around data ops. So in other words, how do we're looking for experience reports where people make it easier for teams to get data they need, liberating data from systems of record, data warehouses where it often takes weeks, months, or quarters to get it to where it needs to go, which is ideally in the hands of teams so they can use it in their daily work. And then the last track is kind of a combination of categories. One is dynamic learning organizations. Second is transformational leadership. And the third is psychological safety. So we're looking for either experience reports or maybe subject matter experts to present on, to help teach us about something that we think is very important for and necessary for technology transformations. So in combination, those tracks make up 73% of the presentations at the conference. And most of those in the past have come through the CFP. And because we've actually shrunk the number of repeat experience reports, there's actually more room for presentations to be accepted from the CFP. So, you know, the reason I share this with you is the CFP is very important, and it is absolutely, there's a huge history of us accept some of the best talks coming in through the CFP. So before I go on, is there any comments or clarifications or emphasis that any of the program committees would like to add?
I guess one thing from me is even if you think you haven't got a great story, you probably have. Yeah. And you don't need to feel like you're finished. Some of the best talks are where people are at the beginning on these topics. So if in doubt, submit.
Very good. Yes. Boy, I think that's probably takeaway number one. If you have any interest, if you're watching this, you probably have some interest in submitting. And I think the top takeaway should automatically go to John. When in doubt, submit, because we are looking for experience reports in all stages of the journey. Beginning, middle, I'm not sure if there is an end, but if there were, we are interested in hearing what you think the end is. So I definitely resonate with that. Jeff, Dominica, anything?
Not that I can think of right now.
Jeff?
I'll probably save this point maybe for a little bit, but that second bullet about spanning the business technology divide is one that is particularly important because DevOps certainly has a big technology element, but it's much more about people, and there's all kinds of people in our organizations that aren't just technologists.
What a great point. In fact, thank you for chiming in, folks, because once again, I think you've elevated another important takeaway. So yeah, Jeff is observing that we have a specific allocation that we give to every one of these tracks. And in the 7 years we've been doing this conference, we have never hit our target of spanning business technology divide. That is classically have been the category that we have to work the hardest at. And often we're looking for every member of the program committee. We're searching our entire networks and our network of networks to find great stories of business leaders who see the value in the work that technology leaders are doing. So if you think you have a compelling story that you can co-present with your business counterpart, submit. And this is the ones that we've all had to look hardest for. So I think all of us would be jumping up for joy, if you have a great story to tell in this category. Yeah?
Okay, so I thought of something. So I don't know if you want to touch on our desire to provide, a safe place for a lot of talks from a diversity background or speaker background, so that we can get lots of different types of people on stage, so we're not just all preaching to echo chamber or, you know, one dominating group of people.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think historically, and Jess, feel free to chime in here if you have more specific numbers, but at least a third of the presenters have been women. And so, you know, I think there's a great track record of us accepting those people. We're actively seeking for those. If do you have any advice for Dominica that you specifically want to put out there?
Well, I would say that while it's useful and helpful to have speaking experience, and it's always good to maybe add a video clip so we can see your speaking, it's not essential. We like to have new, fresh voices on stage. And so if you're new to speaking, but have a great story to tell, we'd like to hear it, and we can provide you with guidance and support to do so.
Awesome. In fact, I think I can reiterate John, right? So when in doubt, submit.
Because, yeah, exactly.
That's right. And a lack of speaking experience is absolutely not an impediment. That should not be a reason not to submit. Awesome. Anything else from the program committee? All right. Let's see here. So, you know, I would say I'm just going to present this for informational purposes only. When you provide the fact that when you submit into an experience report, will help you as you know, when you go through the process, make sure that your experience report does fit this format. But again, we are actively seeking people telling their journey about, you know, spanning all industry verticals. We're looking for where leadership is created, and that doesn't mean a specific title or how high you are up on the org chart, or, you know, how low you are on the org chart. If you want to invert it, leaders come in all shapes, size, and forms, whether it's you know, recognized by the org chart or not. We're looking for what are valid reasons for these technology transformations to succeed in terms of business problems that you set out to solve. Where did you start and why? What did you do, including tools and techniques? What are the outcomes that resulted, and here are the challenges that still remain? So this is a basis of great experience reports, or at least complete experience reports. So I put out an email mid last year to everyone who had submitted and were rejected, and I'm just going to briefly summarize what I put in that email. This will all be going into a blog post. So I think we have typically gotten over 350 submissions. I actually went through the math of you know, how the process, how long it takes to actually go through all the proposals and all the hard work that the program committee does. And so it just when I did the analysis of why proposals were rejected, 4 of them really stuck out. One was there were too vendory. And I put that in quotes because this one kind of defies easy explanation, but when you look at hundreds of submissions, there's certainly a category of experience reports that, in fact, I wish maybe I can, in the blog post, I can actually put an anonymized one out there, but it looks like someone had just copy and pasted a submission about a solution or capability. And these kind of really stand out as a proposal that just doesn't seem like they belong in the conference, whether they're talking about Kubernetes or CI/CD or something. So that's certainly one category. To the program committee members, I mean, I think you're all kind of nodding as I was kind of going through that. Any, what are the other characteristics of kind of these category of proposals? Jeff, Dominica?
Of the rejections?
Yeah. Or vendory, too vendory.
Too vendory. I think one is where the main takeaway, the results are only achievable with one product or tactic that might be directly associated with a vendor. limited options and limited applicability to other organizations.
Yeah, it's like the solution is to do this thing with our company.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and often it reads like a sales pitch, because it probably is a cut and paste of a sales pitch. It's easy to come across them quite, to see something for what it is quite quickly.
Yeah. So I'll find a representative sample of that, and I'll put that into the blog post. Okay, the second, if there are any other comments on that, otherwise I'll go to the second one. The second one is, it's a submission from a consultant or vendor, but they submitted without a customer or client. And so, this is, again, shows up a lot. And often what we'll do is we'll ask for the submitter to submit again, but with the consultant or client. That often, that actually rarely results in a resubmission. This has been done, I would say, well by several people. In fact, I did a 2017 blog post with Damon Edwards and Margaret Cronin, who was at Zurich Insurance at the time. And there were I actually pointed some examples of great talks that were done that was co-submitted by a vendor and their customer. One of them was Ingenico, and it was a consulting firm.
Accenture.
Yeah, exactly. And that was fantastic. That was all about the fantastic re-architecting of the payment processing platform. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. And another great one was, I'll mention the IBM one later, was Jeffrey Payne, CEO of Coveros, who co-presented with a program manager from DISA about how they built a CI/CD pipeline into a top secret environment where they never actually got to see the production environment. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. And there was another great presentation by Anne-Marie Fred from IBM. And this wasn't actually a vendor presentation. This is really about running the transformation of the IBM marketplace, where the order entry systems that support over $1 billion of transactions per year. That was absolutely fantastic. Anyway, so these are great examples of presentations that were done by a vendor. In fact, another great one I would add to that, Jeff, was your colleagues at Excella about the great work that they were doing for citizenship and immigration services about the use of Andon cords in the development environment. So I think there's plenty of evidence that you can do great presentations like this. Any comments on that to my colleagues on the program committee?
Yes to everything that you said.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, not much to add. I think just co-present. Ideally, I think have the client lead from the front. Take the lead in the talk. Yeah.
Yeah, I think. Go ahead. Sorry, John.
I was going to say shared learning.
Yeah. Oh, actually, now that I think about it, there was another great one that was done by TaskTop and Deutsche Bank just last year. So between
TaskTop and
also
with BMW. The nice thing about those talks is that the talks are interactive, and it's not just one person talking for 90% of the time while the other person sort of stands by. Those talks, if it's a co-presentation, can be a bit dull. Really like to see lots of participation, especially from the customer, and just co-presentation in its best form, where there's a bit of bantering back and forth, and it's not like it's just two separate talks. Sometimes they can feel that way, where somebody talks for 20 minutes and then somebody else will get 10 minutes, and they could be two separate talks. Really want to see them integrated.
And related to that, and riffing off of that point, also, so having two people up there is great. It provides some nice dialogue and interchange with presenters up there. You start getting to 3, 4, There is such a thing as too many presenters.
Yeah, we actually discourage that. I think Jess Meyer, who runs the CFP process, right, she'll very much discourage you from going above 2. So that is part of her. You'll be hearing from her if you try that. So I guess a takeaway here is that if you're a consultant or a vendor, by all means, if you have a great client case study, I would encourage you to submit. Just make sure that you do actually submit with your client. Okay,
and
third,
maybe
yeah.
Just one other thing to add as well, to make sure that it doesn't all smell of roses. So to the previous point around too vendory, even with presenting together as a client and a vendor, with our product or with our consulting, everything is fantastic. So I think to make sure that there's vulnerability, to make sure that the problems and the adversity is articulated clearly.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in fact, I just reminded me there was another great presentation that did a great job of that. It was a joint presentation between Fiat Chrysler and where's Olivier Jacques at these days? Is with his firm. Anyway, so great examples. Okay, the third one, I guess this is maybe more of a fact of life. I'm not sure if there's much you can do about it, but another top reason that submissions are rejected is because the experience report is coming from a firm that's too small. In other words, they have maybe 6 people or maybe even tens of people. And I think there's often we're skeptical that the lessons learned there can translate to organizations with hundreds or thousands of engineers. And so I guess you can take that 2 ways, right? I think this means that if you are coming from a large, complex organization with hundreds or thousands of engineers, we're definitely looking for experience reports from you. When in doubt, just submit. If you're coming from a startup, the experience report format probably won't work in your favor. But if it is, we've had cases where people were telling stories from a previous part of their career. I remember one from Yahoo about how they managed the Yahoo Mail platform. We did accept that. Anyway, so if you're at a small startup now, but it's referencing something from your past, make sure that you write about that. Thoughts, comments on that, program committee?
Yeah, well, I mean, that is the nature of the conference. It is an enterprise conference, so we are looking for stories about large enterprises. And I am a bit surprised to see that we do get so many submissions in company sizes 1 to 10.
Yeah.
And so right away, that's sort of a, I don't know, kind of a disqualification.
And there might be good cases where there's a small company working with a big company. And again, to the point of co-presenting, that could be a successful proposal to co-present along with a big company.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but in that case, you'd have the big companies submit, right?
Yeah, right.
Yep.
Yeah, you're right. In fact, okay, that's a great point. So a very specific piece of advice would be make sure that the lead submitter is from the large company, because for me, that's like one of the top filters I look for, right? Is who, what is that large firm? Actually, I've never actually written this down, but I think I will definitely put this into the blog post, and I would love your comment on this, program committee. Is for me one of the top things I look for in terms of submissions that catch my interest are large storied firms that everyone's heard of, the largest brands from any industry vertical that hasn't presented before. And to me, what that really signifies is that who you are and what role you have is maybe not as important about what firm you're with, right? So that certainly factors into the submission. But if you're in a large complex enterprise, you have a story that's worth sharing. Thoughts on that? I mean, does that?
To put a fairly fine point on this, I think brand recognition and name recognition counts with these submissions, because that is what the attendees use as stories to carry back to their organizations as the credibility that they need in order to make the changes. So if this large enterprise could do these things, then we can too. So it gives them hope and credibility and things like that. And so on the flip side, when we're looking at the submissions, if they come across as a global retailer or a large automotive manufacturer, without the brand recognition, it starts to lose some of the value.
Oh, right. And to me, that signals that there's not enough legitimacy of the initiative. If they can't even say who they're from, right? That has very little portable value, to the rest of the community.
Correct.
One other thought to add for anyone who's submitting, using the word scaling or at scale. So, quite often I read proposals that said, something at scale, transformation at scale, DevOps at scale. Scaling is a very maybe personal word or very context sensitive. So sometimes scale was 100 people, sometimes it was 1,000 people, or 10,000, or 100,000, or 300,000.
Right.
And I started to just gloss over in my mind at the word scale. So a bit of advice is just think carefully about, DevOps at scale or transformation at scale, because scale can vary.
Yes. Okay, I'm now taking notes in my PowerPoint deck. And I think if I hear you
be concrete.
correctly, be concrete with numbers.
Yeah. And also it could be a large company and it could be a brand, household name, well-known brand, but the scale could be literally 2 teams within the bigger company, and that only becomes clear, 5 pages down.
Yeah.
So definitely be very clear on that.
Okay, I'm going to put down one more thing here that maybe I'm kind of for the first time being explicit about is, so I did say kind of the dominant factor was sort of the brand recognition of the firm, that the transformation within, and then I think that for me the second thing I would look at is then the seniority of the person, right? So I did say, leaders come in all forms, regardless of what the title is. But the next thing I do look at typically is the title, so I think that might sound mutually contradictory, but I think that does, in general, it's been my experience that the impact and the breadth and the scale of the transformation is proportional to the title of the person submitting. So I don't know exactly how to reconcile those two, but I think that that is something that kind of exposing my thinking of how I evaluate these submissions. Any thoughts on that? So I'm going to write down
I think there is. Yeah, I agree. I mean, there is a correlation. The more senior, the largest sphere of influence, sphere of control an individual has in the company, generally, the bigger the scope of the change, and therefore the harder it is, and the different types of problems that you'll come across. And I think I agree, that's absolutely the sweet spot. It's the big, large companies and a large scope across a large company. That's the ideal.
Because if there's senior leadership on the stage telling the story, then the implication is that we've got buy-in across a large part of the organization, and that's how we're able to enable this change.
Yeah. So, what can you do about it if you don't have a large, sphere of control? Is submit with someone who does have one, right? And I think we've seen examples of that in the past. In fact, we'll often, when we evaluate the proposals, we may actually come back to you and ask you: is there someone more senior that could you submit with your boss, et cetera, specifically addressing this concern? Any thoughts on that, Jeff?
Yes to that. The more senior in the organization, the more span of control and perspective and probably organizational complexity that that person has to deal with.
Mm.
And again, the more credibility that it comes with because of that perspective and the complexity. And then just to echo a couple of the other points, particularly one that John made about being at scale and being concrete with numbers. In addition to sort of the scope or the scale of whatever the journey is also, as much as you can, being concrete about the impact that it had, about the actions, whether that's revenue or people or products or value streams or whatever it happens to be, but some sense of the results, maybe even the before and the after, or at least the scope of what it is that you're talking about. Those always catch my attention when I can see those numbers in there.
And maybe to add to that, Jeff, as well, for those who are earlier in the journey, you know, what their desired outcomes are.
Right.
Because again, you know, it's fantastic to follow people and organizations on the journey. So, you know, we want people applying who have, you know, theoretically just started.
Right.
Yeah.
And some of the examples that I've seen related to that, in terms of people who are early in their journey, it might be a multi-billion-dollar enterprise where they are they're at the early stages of embarking on a journey that touches, you know, 80% of the company's revenue. Like, okay, you know, that counts. That seems complex and meaningful.
Yeah, that's a problem worth solving.
Indeed.
Yeah, and by the way, I was in many of the talks. You'll see a slide with testimonials, and I'm so pleased when do that, because I've often asked presenters to provide a testimonial that demonstrates that your work was actually appreciated. Right? You know, someone that isn't in a technology organization, you know, give me evidence, you know, that someone actually appreciated your work, and you know that no one. You know, whether it's objective measures or subjective measures like testimonials. Okay, great. So the next slide I have is really just more open-ended in terms of other advice to submitters. The first one, I'll just make an offer right now that I made to everyone who received a rejection letter last year, is that if you've been rejected from DevOps Enterprise Summit, in the past.
That's a good qualification there.
And want to know why, just email me and CC Jessica Meyer, and the commitment I'll make is that you'll get a response, and you know, especially for people who got rejected numerous times, I feel like that is you know, you deserve a response. So that's a commitment I'll make right now, and I'll put that in the blog post as well. Another thing that I've seen used to fantastic effect is are people who over the years start interacting with the programming committee members and start asking them about, like, what does it take to get their talk accepted. So whether it's submitting for the first time or is after, you know, numerous attempts. And I think there's several examples where you know, they were actually able to bypass the entire CFP because the story was so compelling. And we just, we have a term for it, automatic accept, right? We'll just go ahead and accept you. Don't even bother submitting through the CFP because, you know, as pitched by the program committee member, it was so compelling that, you know, that we wanted that talk right away. Trying to think of an example that, John, you brought in a couple talks like that, where just the talks were just because of relationships, and
Yeah, so Jenny Wood from RBS, one example.
Oh yeah, no, totally right. So I think if you are been at the conference and you've met some of the program committee members, that's something I would absolutely recommend you do, is just reach out and you know, ask for advice on how to navigate the process. Any thoughts on that,
I
Dominica,
think I
Jeff,
was going
anybody?
to
Yeah,
add,
sorry.
I was just going to add, yeah, you're, like you said, the help is there if people want it. So there's, there's a couple of organisations that I'm coaching right now for the CFP, for the call for papers. So
Oh,
yeah,
brilliant.
just ask for help.
Absolutely, and I'll just say it's not just John. There's an incredible appetite among many of the people, in fact, all of the people in the programming committee, to help people get into the program. So I'll speak for everybody on that. Any other concrete advice on that particular point, Dominica or Jeff? Okay. How about then let's open up for any other advice that you would give to people who want to speak at DevOps Enterprise.
I have one. Go on, Dominica.
Okay. So a couple things. One is avoid jargon. I would write the proposal just like you're speaking one-on-one with somebody. It reads much easier than a formal, formal proposal that uses a lot of buzzwords. Speak like you're telling a story, and it helps if it's a unique story, and it doesn't have to be unique in the way that it's never been heard before, but you can tell it in a new way. You can tell it from a different perspective. Maybe you can touch on one piece of it that others don't. Sometimes the stories are rather generic, and it'd be great if they could go deeper. Instead of being really generic and touching on 10 different things, it's useful to maybe pick one or two of those areas and go really deep into them so we can get some insights and learnings from that.
Oh, can I expound upon that before you go on to your Dominica? Yeah, I think, yeah, so experience reports are great. But then I think actually Damon is one who brings this up a lot, as well as you, Dominica, is, if you can actually elevate one problem point, whether it's information security or ITIL change management process or something that you can point out, here's a specific problem that you want to focus on in the submission. That's actually very helpful for us.
Yeah,
elevate the problem.
Otherwise we get a whole lot of submissions that all cover the same half a dozen things, and none of them are, this doesn't make yours stand out. Another point is to really clearly state what the problem is, why it's a problem, what you did, why you did it, how you did it, how did you get buy-in to do it, and then tell it. We learn more from failure than we do from success. And so always want to hear about the problems, the issues, where did things go bad, what did you do about it, how did you get it back on track, or maybe you didn't, essentially what worked, and maybe more importantly, what didn't work, and where are things at now. And then lastly, I would say to avoid, for experience reports, avoid getting into SME mode or subject matter expert mode. So instead of you should do this now because it worked for us, it's more of this is what we did and why, and this is what worked for us. Not saying it's going to work for everybody, because it's just an experience report from our perspective.
Great. In fact, yeah, it's kind of triggered a memory. I often see a lot of, not as much now, but people talking about why DevOps is important as opposed to what we did. So yeah, it's the fact that people at the conference already know, technology transformation, DevOps is important, right? We're here about the how, not so much the why. Absolutely. Thank you, Dominica. Anything else from you on that?
No, that's it. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Jeff or John?
John?
So do be vulnerable, do talk about problems, don't make it all smelling of roses, and basically, exhibit vulnerability and say, look, we got this wrong, because that's where the biggest learning is. The learning is in the failing, except there's no such thing as failing, because it's all learning. So, and humans like a story. So also think of the storyline. You know, there's the dark side, and there's the Rebel Alliance, and you know, how did the goodness overcome the darkness? So
Yeah.
kind of think about the adversity, and the adversity could be anything. You know, it could be how long it takes to get a release out the door. It could be you know, concept to cache time is too long, and we did this and it went well, and we did this and it didn't go well. So I think humans like the storytelling. So so vulnerability, talk about the problems, make it a story. Another piece of advice, as we've touched on briefly, is have a co-presenter if you can, and ideally with diversity, diversity in general and diversity between the speakers. That could be any form of diversity, including business and tech. So it's great to get different perspectives up on the stage, as well as every other form of diversity. So that's another bit of feedback. And again, back to this leadership point, I think as much as possible have, you know, try and one of the two speakers, try for them to be a senior leader in the organization. I think those would be my kind of top three.
Excellent. Awesome. Thank you, John. Jeff, any other last words of advice?
Yeah, there's a few points in here. One is, again, things that at least get my attention is about going back to the impact. So the impact of the problem or the impact of the journey, as much as you can in people or business terms, less about the technology and how-to. Technical how-tos are okay, but in the context of an enterprise, I think mostly about the business and the people. I think we've crossed the chasm on why DevOps is important, so don't need to spend a lot of time convincing anybody that this is an important thing to do, or the motherhood and apple pie kind of stuff.
Right.
Or what DevOps is.
Or what DevOps is, that's right. And then another thing that's really helpful in reviewing the submissions is the key points. If you were to distill it down, what are the 3 to 5 points that are most important about what you learned and what you hope the audience is going to learn as part of your presentation?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Awesome. Well, very good. Well, we are nearing the top of the hour. I want to thank you again for taking this time to help give advice to people who want to speak at DevOps Enterprise and give specific advice on how to get their submissions accepted. So, Dominica, thank you so much for your time. John and Jeff as well. So, if you are interested in learning more, there will be a blog post up where I'll be writing this up and giving some more specific evidence for some of the some examples that we talked about. And again, if you have any questions, just reach out to me or Jessica Meyer. So with that, thank you so much, and see you at DevOps Enterprise 2020.